Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Dan Walsh. I'm the president of the Greater Cleveland region for Huntington Bank. And I'm pleased that all of you were able to join us today and participate in a pivotal conversation about Cleveland's transformation. I'd like to thank IdeaStream for broadcasting this event live on 90.3 today, and WKYC for streaming this event live over the internet. When Huntington partnered with Inside Business and the City Club to launch this Business Leaders series, we set very ambitious goals. We wanted to bring our regional leaders into the same room to talk about what is working and what needs our attention. We wanted to focus on 5 pillars upon which our economy we are building and is new to Cleveland. I'm building a new Cleveland. Sorry about that. First is infrastructure, innovation, manufacturing, workforce development, and quality of life. Most importantly, we wanted to show the world that Cleveland has unbuckled our rust belt and scrapped it. We wanted to show that we are growing as a leading world-class healthcare center. The significant investment in innovation is creating cutting-edge technologies which are being commercialized, that our diversified economy is creating jobs at a steady pace, and that we are poised to help lead the economic recovery of our nation. There are more than 30,000 open jobs within a 20-mile radius of downtown Cleveland and 100,000 open jobs in Ohio. Unemployment is at its lowest rate in 3 years, and the gross regional product is expected to grow in 2012 for the 3rd consecutive year. Cleveland's unemployment rate is 7%, better than the national average by more than 1%. And it's only the beginning. A total of more than $6 billion of new investment is being pumped into the Cleveland economy. Our skyline isn't the only thing changing. So is the trajectory of our regional economy. And in the next 6 months, our country will elect a president. And in this time between today and November 3rd, it's safe to say the candidates from both parties will spend a lot of time in Ohio, especially in Cleveland. As you well know, we have the privilege of being one of the largest swing counties in a critical swing state. It is important that we share the true story of Cleveland with both candidates. Everyone in this room will benefit if we can shift the dialogue from what we were to what we are becoming. It's a story worth telling. We are a resilient region that is taking control of its own destiny. And I'm proud that so many of you have taken time out of your day to be part of this. I'm excited to hear from both David Gregory and this distinguished panel in a few moments. Today we turn the page on a new chapter. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our guests today, our distinguished guests today, including David Gregory from NBC's Meet the Press, and an impressive panel of business leaders, including Chris Connor, Toby Cosgrove, Steve Steinauer, and Jerry Sue Thornton. Chris Connor is the chairman and CEO of Sherwin-Williams Company. Chris is also on the boards of Eaton Corporation and is a director of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland and is the current chairman of the Greater Cleveland Partnership. Dr. Toby Cosgrove is CEO and president of the Cleveland Clinic, where he presides over a $5 billion global healthcare system, which has been consistently recognized as one of the top hospitals in the world. Steve Steinauer is a president and chief executive officer of Huntington Bank, also happens to be my boss. Huntington is a $54 billion regional bank headquartered in Columbus, Ohio, and it's a bank which has been coined the Bank of the Midwest by Money Magazine. Steve is one of the first to recognize that Midwestern recovery is outpacing the United States and has become a leading voice on the topic. Dr. Jerry Sue Thornton is president of Cuyahoga Community College, the largest community college in Ohio. She's a director on a number of boards of great Cleveland companies, including Applied Industrial Technologies, American Greetings, RPM International, and University Hospitals. She's also on the boards of the Cleveland Foundation and the Greater Cleveland Partnership. I am especially delighted to welcome David Gregory to Cleveland today. Let's give him a warm welcome.
A warm welcome for our friend from LA.
Mr. Gregory is a moderator of Meet the Press, America's #1 Sunday morning public affairs program. Since joining NBC in 1995, Mr. Gregory served as a correspondent based in Chicago and Los Angeles, covering the O.J. Simpson trials and the trial of Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh. He first came to Washington in 1998 to cover the Clinton impeachment story for MSNBC and went on to serve as the NBC's chief White House correspondent for 8 years during the presidency of George W. Bush. Mr. Gregory has covered 3 presidential campaigns and reported extensively on the aftermath of 9/11, including the run-up of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq from both Washington and around the world. He is a contributor to other NBC News and MSNBC programs such as Today, Nightly News, and Morning Joe, and frequently moderates political and foreign policy discussions for nonpartisan groups like the Brookings Institution. Mr. Gregory has been recognized as one of Washington's 50 best and most influential journalists during his coverage of the White House. Ladies and gentlemen, David Gregory.
Good afternoon. Thank you all very much. Thanks for welcoming me to Cleveland. It's great to be here. I was thinking as I was coming in, and not just because of how many business folks are in the audience here, but I thought this was an opportunity to speak to the real 1% in America. And of course, by that I mean you are the 1% who will decide this election. So it's quite a distinction for Ohio to have. And if you haven't seen it yet, you haven't seen anything yet in terms of the advertising you're going to see on television from these 2 campaigns and all the visits you're going to see. I've spent a fair amount of time in Ohio, less time in Cleveland, but it's because I spent 8 years running around with President Bush, both on the campaign trail and when he was president. So this was not a county that they were counting on doing as well in. So let's just say we spent some time in the southern part of the state a little bit more often. And I saw President Bush at an event this past week in Washington. And we sat down, and I hadn't seen him in a while, and he said, "Gregory, I don't watch you." He said, "No, I don't watch you ever." I said, "Mr. President, I mean, you didn't want to see how it's progressing and how is it?" He said, no, I wasn't worried about you progressing. I don't watch. And he stood up in front of the crowd and he said, "I don't miss Gregory." And then he said, "Is he still on television?" It's a fascinating time to be covering a presidential campaign, especially when the stakes are so high. Unfortunately, especially when the country is so divided politically, which is what makes Ohio so incredibly important politically. But it also is interesting how things have changed in the past 4 years. When President Obama was elected, it really was an electric time in the country. There was a sense of history, there was a sense of new beginnings, and I think whether you were a Republican or a Democrat, that sense of excitement pervaded most parts of the country, and certainly that was the case in Washington, where there was so much hype and expectation and anticipation of the new president. It sort of permeated all parts of the Capitol. Even the metro system, even the metro card featured President Obama's face on it, and I thought, that's setting very high expectations indeed. But so that sense of excitement was everywhere, and so during the transition period, President Bush and Mrs. Bush invited me, and I have 3 young children, invited us to come see the movie Despero in the White House Theater, which is very exciting, and the kids enjoyed it. And afterward, President and Mrs. Bush handed out cookies to the kids, which I thought was very nice. And so my now nearly 7-year-old, but so he was about 5, so he was almost, whatever he was, almost 4, whatever it exactly happened. I guess it's coming up about 4 years. Anyway, so he was old enough to talk and be coherent. So he runs over and he meets the president, President Bush, and he comes back. He said, "Daddy, I just met the president. This is so exciting. I put my hand out and he put his hand out and he shook my hand and I just met the president." I said, "Sweetheart, this is fantastic. What a great day." And he's walking away. We're about 5 feet away from President Bush, and he looks up at me and he says, "Was that Barack Obama?" So it just gives you some sense of how, if that was the high water mark, 4 years later, things are very different. The country is still going through a very difficult time with the economy. Ohio certainly understands that, even though Ohio is doing better than the national average. Hooray for Ohio. But things are still very difficult in the economy. Americans still look at how the country's operating and say, we're headed on the wrong track. And that's something that when we cover politics, we look a lot at, because we know that that's a big driver of the independent vote, whether people think the country's headed in the right direction or not. And, you know, there's lots of difficulties, whether it's in our healthcare system, whether it's the challenges we face overseas with both emerging threats, but also as we try to wind down conflicts in Afghanistan and having already done that in Iraq. But the sense of optimism is really eroded in the country as people think about what they can do to get ahead and provide a better life for their families. And what's underneath all of that is such distrust for Washington. You know, Washington just doesn't work well. I mean, it's the bottom line. You know, we face a lot of challenges and problems as a country. Washington does not appear to be up to the task. And it's deeply distressing to Americans all over the country, Republicans and Democrats, who look and see a political system that is sort of beyond dysfunctional. You know, I mean, there's gridlock and then there's true dysfunction. And you saw it with the debt debacle last week. I have to say, I had the budget chairman from the House, Paul Ryan, on the program yesterday, as well as Dick Durbin from Illinois, assistant majority leader. And there was no sense that the outcome of the presidential race would change anything in terms of entrenched views about how to solve things, like the federal budget deficit. It's a very sad state of events, and therefore it's against that backdrop that you're going to see these candidates come in here on a near daily basis to make their pitch for what they'll do to turn the economy around, to get people hired again and make bold predictions. But I'm listening for the person who's actually able to somehow break through how Washington operates. Because if we don't change that, these problems get so severe that you have change that gets mandated. You know, when we had the financial collapse, the time when Washington works most beautifully is when there's some sort of crisis. So you saw the financial collapse and the necessity to bail out some of the nation's top banks. And, you know, you had a Treasury Secretary who was emboldened, who went to Congress and said, look, there are a lot of options here. We have to do this. And the TARP program was put into effect. It was controversial then and controversial later, but it still largely worked, and certainly worked to help the banking industry at that time. And indeed, the federal government has come out okay on the other end, even though the philosophical debate is continued about whether that was the right thing for government to be doing. But absent that sort of crisis, government doesn't seem to work very well. And I thought it was interesting yesterday, you know, we get these moments, and I'm happy to say that Meet the Press is often, particularly of late, where they seem to be happening, where Cory Booker, the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, was on the program and was critical of the Obama campaign for advertisements criticizing Mitt Romney over his time at Bain Capital, because he thought it was, in his words, nauseating that they were going to indict all of private equity as a way to sort of really make a case against Governor Romney. And it indicated to me something that I see around the country, and I also pick up when I talk to business leaders, that the closer you get to the people, the more pragmatic our political leaders are. So that a mayor of a town like Newark that has such problems is working as closely as he can with business, as closely as he can with a Republican governor, private equity where he can, corporations where he can, to attract business, to grow the economy, to create jobs, to create development in his community. And when we get to the federal level and you have members of Congress from both branches, it becomes a lot easier to become less practical, more dogmatic, more ideological, more entrenched, and therefore you get a lot less done. So I thought that was an interesting moment, and it says something, I hope, about the program that I'm moderating. Now, Meet the Press is an institution. It's much bigger than the moderator. And it stands to me for not just quality journalism, but a platform that Americans still look to and still trust to slow down and take an assessment. Where are we? Where are we going? I've wanted it to be a place where there's balanced, thoughtful discussion that's compelling to watch, that features the political discussions of the day, but can get to some of these discussions in a more thoughtful, sometimes provocative, and unpredictable way. So it's not just going to line up left versus right, but we're going to have discussions like we had yesterday on our roundtable discussion to try to get to some of these solutions, at least shed a lot more light than heat on these particular matters. And that's meant a lot to me. And it's, based on, in part, who our viewers are, but also my commitment as moderator. I want it to be a place where there's a robust discussion of business in the country and of the economy in the country. There's the aspect of what the federal government's doing, what the federal government should or should not be doing, but also what are the forces at work that are going on in the private sector around the country, in education, in corporate America, in financial services. Because this is where a lot of the solutions are going to come from. This is where government can learn a lot from individuals who are really powering those sectors. So I think that's a good place for us to begin as a panel here this morning. And assuming my mic is on.